Hello everyone and welcome back to part 2 of the beat 'em up tutorial. And today what we're going to be doing is finishing off the player states. Now we already established a lot of the player states, so like we got running, we got jumping, we got punching, all that good stuff. But now we need to do some other states, including the player getting hurt. And the reason that we're doing this now is that we're trying to prepare for when we have enemies. So as you can see, this is the throne state that we're going to be adding, and then it gets up at the end there, just like that. That's perfect. And we're also going to be adding in a hurt state. Alright, perfect. There's our hurt state. We play this short little punch animation. And so basically that's what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding in these two extra states. And we're going to do this now so that when we put together our enemies in the next video, it'll be a lot easier because they already come with the code we need to actually damage them. So let's go ahead and get on that right now. So the first thing we have to do is we have to make another object. So down in our sprites, we're going to add a sprite called SBR underscore hitbox underscore punch. So let's see what this looks like. So this sprite is not going to be included in the GitHub files. I'm going to add some more sprites because I don't think the sprites we're going to be using today are in there. But this sprite just consists of a simple animation where there's just a couple frames of this red square. You might be wondering why this sprite looks like that. Well, what I did is I just copied the player's punch animation and then I added these two squares. And the reason is these two squares are going to be our hitbox. They're going to be whatever collides with this is actually going to get hurt. So I just created a new layer and I just drew these. And then if we go back out to our workspace, if we go to the collision mask, you can see here we clicked precise per frame. Now precise per frame is really important for hitboxes because that means on this frame there's no hitbox, but here there's a hitbox and here there's a hitbox. So that's just as we want it. We want the collision mask for our hitboxes very, very precise. And this makes sure that this will eventually line up with our player's animation. Both on the origin, both on where the box is located, is perfect. So now let's go to the hitbox and see what code we put in there. So as I said before, we're going to edit this more in a later video. But right now what we need to do is we need to put target object. So this is what the hitbox is going to collide with. And we're going to set that to obj underscore player. Damage type, we're going to store that as a string. And we're going to call it punch. And then damage to do. So for this tutorial we're not going to use that, but we will need it later. So you can just go ahead and put that in right now. And then step event. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to check if we're touching an instance of the object that we want to hurt. If we are, then with that instance of that object, we are going to hurt it. Now you might see this, the instance get hurt. So basically when I had trouble doing this before, the problem would be something like this, where I would just do underscore I dot HP minus equals 1. So this code would just decrease whatever it's touching, that health by 1, right? This was fine until I got into issues where there would be multiple different hitboxes and I would want all of them to do different amounts of damage to the players. Like one hitbox could be for a different type of attack or something like that. And so that was kind of always a pain. Another thing that sometimes I would do is I would do something like HSP is equal to -5 or something. So like this could be like knockback or whatever. But the problem with doing all of this is that now all of this code is in the hitbox state. So whenever you want to edit this, if there's like a slight change you want to make, you have to go all the way back to the hitbox object. The purpose of how we're going to do it today is we're going to give the system maximum flexibility while also trying to reduce the amount of times we need to go into this object. Because if the player is getting hurt, we want to go to the player to edit that code. And this is what I've done here. So let's go back to our player object. And we're going to add a few things. So first what we're going to do is we need to add a few new states. So we're going to be using this hurt state, this thrown state, and this get up state. So you can add those 3 states just fine. So hurt, thrown, and get up. Next, we need to add a few more sprites to our animation list. So we're going to add a hurt sprite. That's this one here. We're going to add a thrown sprite, which looks like this here. And we're going to add a pickup sprite, which is this one here. So as you can see, these 3 sprites that we're going to be using later. Alright, next. Now this part here is the most important part of our code. So for example, this right here, this is called a method function. And basically what this does is it's similar to a script, which a script is just like a bit of code that you can call anywhere inside a function. But for this is actually a script or a function that the player object owns. So whenever we call this, we need to do something along the lines of obj_player dot get hurt in order to call it. And then what we need to do is we need to put in this data. So if we go back to our hitbox object, so this right here will get the specific instance ID of the object we're colliding with. So that'll get not all of the player objects, but just the instance of the one that we're touching. That's what this code does. And then we're going to pass in our ID. So basically the ID of the hitbox that just hurt the player. Then we're going to pass in what type of damage we're doing. So we want to pass in punch. And then we're going to pass in how much damage we're actually doing. So that'll be this number. As I said before, it's unused, but we'll use it later. So let's go back to the player. As you can see, for our function we need all of these functions. So all of that is in there. All these arguments are passed in. Alright, perfect. So basically, we want to make sure that the player can get hurt in different ways based on the attack type that they are receiving. So to do that, I created this switch state. So basically what it does is if it's switch damage type punch, then do all of this stuff. If it's damage type thrown, do all of this stuff. And through that, we can actually edit. We can actually give the player different behaviors based on what kind of damage they sustain. Now, something else interesting here. So this if, basically it says if our current state isn't the hurt state, then go to the hurt state. But we can also make it so that the player in some states is immune to some types of damage. So for example, like in most fighting games, when you're punched, if you're also ducking while you're getting punched, then you won't get hurt. Or if your game has like a blocking state, you can make a state that's blocking, and then you can just add that to this if statement. This in air, basically how I have it set up now is if you get punched while you're in the air, you won't take any damage. So that's basically what that does. And then inside, what we do is we set our state to the hurt state so that we can play the animation. And then later on, we can add this code, which is just HP minus equal damage to do. Basically, the idea here is that you can make a variable that's like your HP, your health basically. And then this code, because it's set up like this, because this is part of your code, This will only run once, and that'll allow you to only take this much damage once the frame when you're punched, and then it goes to the punch animation through the state machine. We aren't going to bother with that just right now, but if you want to play around with it on your own, that's basically how this system works. Alright, and then for the thrown state, it's going to be very similar. So this is, generally I use this for like uppercuts and attacks like that. That's how I'm doing it in my personal project. So basically we're going to want to make sure that we aren't in the thrown state, and also that we aren't getting hurt. So as you can see, this attack can actually hit you when you're in the air and when you're ducking. So that can make this a little bit unique. So what we're going to do is we're going to send it to the thrown state. And basically, as you saw in the demonstration earlier, the player is going to get thrown up into the air and to the side. So to do that, we need to figure out where the hitbox is and basically point away in the opposite direction. So this is going to get, is the Xbox to the right of us, to the left of us? And then based on if it's to the left or right, we're going to set our HSP to 5 in that direction away from the object. We're going to set our VSP to 0. Basically, we don't want the player moving up or down. And then we're going to set our ZSP to -20. And that will give us that nice arc of the player flying through the air. Like it's kind of like a cartoon. And that should be everything we have in here. So just that switch statement, these if statements, and so on and so forth. So now let's go into the step and see what those states look like. So everything should be the same, except we're adding just a few more states. So the first one we're adding to our state machine here is states.hurt. So basically, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure to set our sprite to the hurt sprite. This here just cancels any motion. So the player is going to stop moving once this code runs. And then what we want to do is as soon as our animation has finished, we're just going to leave the state. And then it's as simple as that. So if we run the game, with just this code here, we should be able to see. Alright, perfect. We run up. So as you can see, that's the sprite, that's the animation of us getting hurt. And that will play until the very end. And then once that happens, it should function perfectly. Now one thing we might have to add, let's actually go back. And let's be sure just to set that image underscore index to 0. And that'll make sure that the animation doesn't break or anything silly like that. Because remember, that is an issue with some of these. We have to make sure that the animation isn't playing from the halfway point. So now we get to see the whole animation play out. That's perfect. Alright, wonderful. So now we can test the thrown state. So first what we're going to do is let's go to the hitbox. And let's change our damage type to thrown. I like to do it as a string, because that means we can add as many types of damage as we want. If it was an enum, like we have elsewhere, it would just kind of be, it would be more difficult. So thrown, basically what we're going to do is we're going to set our sprite index to the thrown sprite. And then what we're going to do instead of animation finished is when my z is equal to 0, we're going to go to the getup state. So basically what this is here, what this is saying is when the player is back on the floor again. So they've like sailed up into the sky and now they're falling back down, and as soon as they hit the floor again, they can go to the getup state. So this getup state, let's see how that works. Basically what this does here is we're going to go to the pickup sprite, because basically the player is basically like getting up off the floor. There's just a get up off the floor animation. That's very common in these kinds of fighting games. When someone gets knocked over, generally they play this getting ups animation. We're also going to be sure to set the image index to 0 because we're using animation finished, and we got to make sure that the sprite plays normally from the very beginning and not from halfway through the animation. We're going to set H to speed of V to speed of 0. We don't want the player moving around when it's in this state. So we're just going to tell them to not move. And then once the animation for this sprite is finished, we can go back to the idle state. And if we play that, we should be able to see. Wonderful. So as you can see there, the player flies back. And then there's this one frame of animation where the player plays that get up kind of animation. It's just like a very simple sprite switch. And then perfect. And if we go around and we get hit from the other side, as you can see, we get thrown off. Perfect. So all of this is going to allow us to set up enemies in the near future. All we really have to do now is when we punch like this, we create one of these hitboxes at our position that hurt the enemy for us. And that's really all that you need to do. But for now, that's where we're going to end this particular tutorial. Be sure to like and subscribe and comment if you need any help with your project. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good one.